Hello and welcome to In a Spiritual Sense, where we discuss all things spiritual, from growing your intuition, speaking with spirit guides, diving into past lives, the paranormal, and more. Join me, Stacey Piagno, where we work to bridge the gap between science and spirit. Hello and welcome back to another episode of In a Spiritual Sense. I'm your host, Stacey Piagno, and it has been a pretty magical week. I have been having so much contact with spirit lately, it has been crazy. And I don't know if I've mentioned before, but in my off time, I am an elementary school teacher. And I mean, at work alone, there have been so many crazy coincidences, just one after the other. And there was a point one day where I think it was about 10 times, and I would think about somebody walking in the door, and I would look over to the door, and they would walk in. I'd be at my desk, kind of zoned out, and one of my students would kind of pop into my head, and then I would look up, and they would raise their hand and call out my name. And so it's just been like, one after the other with these things. Another funny story that I wanted to share with you guys was I was at home with my partner, and we were watching TV. And he was turning up the volume, and he was getting into the 40s. And as you guys know, number 42 is a number that I use for my spirit guides to contact me. And I was thinking to myself, all right, spirit guides, if you're here with me right now, I want you to make him stop on volume number 42. So he goes up to like 45. And I was like, okay. And he gets a sip of water. And then he goes right back down to number 42. And I was like, I knew it. I knew you were here with me, even though they always are. But so it's just kind of been nice to be so in tune lately. And, with that said, we are going to get into all of the Clair Senses today and mediumship. So staying in tune with spirit is something that we are really going to dive into. And you guys are in for a special treat because today on the show, we are going to have Gabe Colon, who is a dear friend of mine. And Gabe is a clairvoyant and a medium. So we're going to have him share a little bit of background and get into some fun stories today. But before we do, there is one last story that I really wanted to share with you guys. I had a beautiful dream, and I thought the message in this dream was too good to not share. So something that's kind of been on my mind lately is all the work I'm doing and everything that I've been kind of starting with this podcast and the direction that it's going. And I actually got asked to be interviewed on another podcast to kind of share, what In a Spiritual Sense is all about. And leading up to that, it's not that I was nervous, but I had a lot to say and I really wanted to represent this show well. And so let's just say it was on my mind. So the night before the interview, which was this week, I had a dream where I show up at this water park. And right off the bat, the scene was a great representation of life because, with water, you're getting into your emotions and the fluidity of life. And then the premise of the dream was me trying to get on this ride. Okay, so first of all, we need to treat life like it's a ride. But what was interesting is the whole time I had to try to get up to the top of this ride, get up to the top of your goal. And I had to go to the line, which was internal. So it's very much symbolic of going internal within yourself. And as I was in line, I had to go up and down and up and down. And it was as if it was an obstacle course. And so, I would make it up halfway and then I would have to backtrack a little bit. And I would make it up even farther and I would have to backtrack. Very symbolic of life. And so long story short, I get up to the top of the slide and I was about to go down. And as I was waiting, I felt a little stalled. And I was kind of thinking to myself, I wonder why can't I go down the slide yet? And as I was thinking that, I look over to the side and there was this group of people using tarot cards. And something that I do when I use my tarot cards is as I'm shuffling, I will kind of ask for one of them to pop out. Or if there's a card that's upside down, Spirit knows that I'll always choose that card. And so not that that has to happen every time, but if it does happen, that's a way that Spirit can communicate with me. And so in my dream, this group of friends were playing with tarot cards. And as they were shuffling the deck, I see that one of the cards is backwards. And I made a pretty big ordeal out of it. And I get out of line and I go over and I say, hey, let me see that card. And so I pull up the card, and on the card it says, just be yourself. And I got chills and I thought, what a beautiful message to hear. And so after I heard that, I was then able to go down the slide. And as I came out of that dream, I was very consciously told the reason sometimes we feel stalled or stuck in life is because there's a message or lesson that we haven't yet grasped. And once we can take the time to learn what that message is, then we can go. Then you can go down the slide. And I thought that was such a beautiful analogy for life. And if there's anybody who's feeling like they're stuck or life is stalling, or if you're getting impatient, we've talked about that before, just realize that the reason this is happening is all part of the plan. Okay, it's all part of your journey. And sometimes you'll stay in that space until you learn whatever it is Spirit is trying to teach you. So, with that said, we're going to get into today's episode, and it's a really great one, so I hope you guys enjoy. Hello, Gabe. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I've been wanting to have you on for such a long time, ever since I got started, because every time we talk, we always have great conversation. So I would really love for you to just start us off and give us a little bit of background on you and just tell everyone who is Gabe.
Awesome. Wow, who is Gabe? I was born in Jersey City. I'm a full-time stylist. I guess I'm a medium and clairvoyant. And yeah, that's who I am.
Very cool. When did you kind of get into your knowing that you were a medium and clairvoyant? Like, was it something that you grew up doing, or did you kind of learn later on?
Now that I think back, I think of when I was a child or younger, realizing now that it was just natural. It just always came natural. I thought it was normal. And the more I think back, I'm like, wow, I was using it all my life, the gift.
Yeah. And that's kind of something I want to get into. We'll probably kind of get there a little bit later is, the fact that we label a lot of these terms is something that really is natural to our spirit and it's normal for us. So we're going to kind of get into that a little bit later. But I would love for you to start off first. Do you know enough about the clairs to kind of just give us a little background on like what they are and maybe an example of what it is for people who might not know what all of the Clair Senses are?
As the clairs, now I'm still learning.
Okay.
Because again, it's hard to put a label. I don't want to put a label on it.
Yeah.
But one of the Clair Senses, it just I can't even describe it. Sort of like I guess you get visuals.
Yeah. I have a couple here because I'm learning as well. And it's funny that you mentioned not wanting to even label the clairs because there are different ones that go from our senses. But what I've learned through doing more research is they really blend together. And it is kind of hard to say, oh, well, this is specifically what this clair is. And this is specifically, and for those of you who are new to the clairs, basically, the best way for me to kind of think about it is like an advanced version of the senses, like the five senses. And so the one that you just mentioned is seeing. And I know that one it's clairvoyance. So clairvoyancy, what does that look like for you? I know it's different per person, but for you specifically, what does that look like? Is it more of an external seeing? Is it an internal or both?
It's both. It comes with a visual and a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way I can explain it is a uplifting physical feeling in the air, so to speak, or a sort of heavy feeling when it's a little bit more negative.
Yeah.
And I can walk in a room and I can feel what's in the room just by that gauge, I call it.
Yeah.
It's a
like a weight.
A weight. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting because I've kind of witnessed that too. I I gave a little bit of background in another episode that I have done the ghost tours for many years. And downtown St. Augustine, really old city, there's lots of energy there. And it's funny because I never really knew a lot about that, but I knew there have been several times when I have walked into a room and I am like, there is somebody watching me. And it is that kind of heavy feeling. And then for me, I get scared. So I don't know if you ever get scared anymore, but.
Oh, I find myself with visuals all the time. It's still jarring, or even though it's real, it's a part of you, it still shocks me sometimes.
Yeah. And so one of those, according to the label, Claire, let's see, the feeling is clairsentient. So I guess a mixture between clairsentient is when you can feel, a heightened sense of feeling. And then your clairvoyance is when you have that heightened sense of seeing. When you do see something, do you see apparitions? Like, do you see, I would say like the external apparition. What does that look like again for you?
So it's more of, wow. So again,
I know it's a tough question to kind of get into.
Describe it, and how I feel it is, okay, within our space, and there's a space in between that. And it's almost like it's like a shadow. Okay. Like a very translucent shadow. And they come through that translucent.
Kind of like a movement of like a shadow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's funny. Next week, we're going to get into ghosts and spirits, more of the grounded spirits. So I'm always interested about that because I don't see apparitions, probably because I've put that boundary there because I'm not sure if I really want to. But I do a lot of the internal seeing where I see like images. And it's funny because I've spoken about that on the show before. I never used to really think that, I didn't think that was anything odd. I guess I had always seen that, but by kind of sitting and meditating and spending time with myself, I start to see it all the time. And it's like, the more you use it, the more you realize it's a form of communication. So do you have that as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I finally learned how to just block it.
Okay.
Because it could be exhausting.
That was going to be my next question for you is boundaries. Like, when I say boundaries, what does that mean for you with spirit? Like, how have you had to create boundaries?
I learned, there was a point in my life that I had no clue how to stop it. And I've spoken to a therapist about it. There was a point where I thought I was crazy, and I learned now that as I'm getting older, I can't open up myself to all of this all the time. So when I'm home, nothing's allowed in my house, nothing's allowed in my space. And I no longer want to host or, so I just say, no, there's a barrier here. This is my space. I use spiritually, I learned how to close up my home,
Right. And how do you so what does that look like to close up your home? Like, what is it? It's like for people who are kind of new at this, what do you do to create a boundary? Do you just say something? Do you use herbs? How does that work?
I burn sage. So even when I'm cleaning or dusting, it's almost it's literally purification, a cleansing per se. And I burn sage. I sweep out the door. I use salt, and I say, nothing's allowed beyond this point. And that's just how I do it. Yeah.
How does salt work? Because I'm curious about this myself. You see in movies and stuff, put the salt ring around you. Like, do you just kind of sprinkle it around your borders of your door? Do you have to make a circle?
No, around your door, around your windows. Salt it's a very purifying element or mineral.
Yeah.
I guess salt to me, because if it comes from the ocean, it's so clean that it just makes sense to me.
Yeah. It's funny that you're like, okay, I totally get what you're saying. And it's funny because when I think of how to explain things to people, because I've had people ask me questions similar to this, but different. And it's like, I mean, I never like looked it up before, but I just feel like that's the right thing to do. And it's funny being intuitive. Like when you just feel that it's right, it probably
Right.
is, you know?
Just go with it, right? And
Yeah.
just I learned the hard way that you just go with what you're feeling, and your body tells you something for a reason. You
Yeah.
know, you just that's what happens is we just learn to close it out. Again, we're taught this is the way it should be because this is the way it is.
Yeah.
We program ourselves to do that, and
Mhm.
I realized we lose that childlike innocence.
Mhm.
And I learned that you have to hold on to that,
Yes.
you know, hold on to the child spirit in you. And that keeps you open to just to anything, you
It's
know?
interesting. Yeah, I've actually kind of a couple months back really been into that idea of like your childhood innocence and leaning on that. And just
Mhm.
because you're leaning on that innocence, it doesn't mean you're not aware. You know, like
Right.
there's that kind of duality of like, oh, you're innocent, you're not aware of what's going on around you. And I've spoken on that before.
Mhm.
But there's a difference in yes, remaining open to everything. And I want to kind of get into the misconceptions of spirituality and why do you think, so this is going to be a couple different questions. One, like misconceptions, and why do you think all of these misconceptions started in our society? So it's kind of a layered question, but I guess let's start with like, what are some misconceptions that you see?
Yeah, the first misconception here, especially moving from, you know, from Jersey, tri-state area to a more conservative state,
Mhm.
Florida. Um, I think the conflict there is it tends to be religion and upbringing. You know,
Mhm.
you don't understand why you shouldn't XYZ, but you do it because you were told.
Yeah.
And you know, even if you ask the parent why, they probably don't even understand why. This
Mm.
is the way they were taught,
Yeah.
you know, and not realizing it's a natural instinct. It's I think the reason why it's taboo stems from way back, from where they realized that power, unfortunately, uh, maybe they can control the simple man back in the day, you know, and we were just brought up, this is the way it is because this is the way we say so. And oh, I sense this. No, no, you shouldn't. That's bad. But not explaining why or understanding, is it bad? I
Mhm.
guess it lost its that sense caused by, I guess, control and power, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Government, you know?
I agree. I'm glad you brought up the history of it because that's something I think of a lot with religion and spirituality. It's kind of like these two boxes that we have created. Um, and I think throughout history, you know, as colonization was happening, you know, the people in power were learning about religion and they used religion as this fear-based idea to control people. It's exactly what you just said. And I think within that, religion got used with some messy stuff. And I think the intention behind it got kind of lost. And you kind of see like the aftermath of that today. And it's not that religion is bad at all. You know, you and me
Right?
have talked about religion is, you know, a branch of spirituality. But I think when you get too stuck in the structure and the rules and the good and bad and shame, I think that's when it turns into something that it wasn't supposed to be. So, do you know anything about the witch trials? Like, do you know? I'm always interested in this. I've never really
You know
researched it.
what? I kind of think every era has a witch trial.
Ooh, yeah.
You know, I mean, I hate to bring it back to political, but if you think about what's going on right now, the gays went through it. You know, ethnicities went through it
Yeah.
because you're different,
Yes.
no
Let's
matter
talk
what
about
it
this.
is. Hey,
Yeah.
you know, race, sex, whatever it is. At some point, because you're different, you had a trial.
Mm,
You know, and
that is so powerful.
I think we're still struggling to understand that like spirit is spirit, and no matter what you are, no matter what sex you want to be, or you know,
Hmm.
I think we're still having these trials to this day.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think that's a beautiful way to put it, is that it's kind of like there's always a reason to find fault with a group or to segregate each other. And I think that's kind of natural to the way that we think. You know, we have to categorize, we have to label. And then with that, there's this natural instinct to want to be the best, or to want to, you know, be in charge. And, you know, that's a little bit of the right.
Yeah.
So I definitely do think that that is still going on, you know, and that's what we're kind of seeing. And I love that you kind of equated that to the witch trials. Maybe we'll have to have an episode on the witch trials. Let's do some, go back and do some research or something. I don't know if enough to speak on it.
I've been to Salem many times. So
what's that?
I've been to Salem many times.
Yeah. What is it like? I've never been out there.
Oh, it's awesome. It's touristy, but it's kind of refreshing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to see that it's celebrated.
Yeah.
And actually, I was telling Dane, my husband,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of cool how now spirituality is starting to become more mainstream.
Yeah.
Crystals are being seen more. It's nice. You know, it's nice.
And it's funny because I've had this conversation with people before, and it's kind of like, oh, spirituality is just a trend. And whether it is or isn't, it's nice that it's actually happening, though. What does spirituality mean to you? That's a hard question, but
Spirituality to me, wow. What does it mean to me? It means, I think it's a higher sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like, to me, humility. It's all combined with who you are, how much humility you have towards others, understanding for others, sort of letting go of your ego.
Yeah.
Which is hard. I mean, just being human, it's a natural thing. To me, that combined is being spiritual. Trying to understand something that would be hard for you to accept.
Yeah.
Is part of being spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
You know, wow, to put it in one word, it's hard.
It is hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
I think about this all the time.
Yeah, I think that sort of squeezed into a little box.
Yeah. Not that it has to be in a box, because that was kind of what we've talked about, is
compressing all of that, not in a box,
right.
Compressing all of that into one, I guess, a higher self.
Yeah. That's kind of what I think about. I think about, like, it just means stepping into your power, you know, who you are, and whatever modality that looks like for you is beautiful. Somebody just asked me this question, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, you know, being spiritual can be religious. Being spiritual can being out in nature. It can be being a chemist. It can be all of these different things.
Well, I find that interesting when you know, you look at people in I think it's Baptist churches, and they're dancing around and they're speaking in tongues, and you know, it's kind of interesting to watch. I'm like, wow, they're really, like, what they're experiencing, that's spiritual, that is within themselves.
Yes.
You know, and it's kind of the same vibe that you and I get, but in a different way. But it's fascinating how, like, I'm like, oh yeah, I see what you're doing there. You know,
I'm glad that you said that, because it's funny. I see so often that even in the quote spiritual world, you know, we want to label religion, and we think that religion is bad. And so, but by doing that, now you're not any better than being judged for being spiritual. And the fact that you just brought up an example of a religious quote group doing something that is
witchy, quote unquote.
Right. It can be seen as witchy itself, but that's what they are connecting with. And that is spirituality. And it's just all done in different ways. And it's funny because that is their truth, as this is our truth. And I speak a lot about different truths. And it's like, we try so hard to confine each other in each other's truths that we get stuck in that. And if we could just accept that, you know, God made different religions because there's different kinds of people. I love that. You know, I read that somewhere, and it's just really stuck with me, because, you know, we're all here to be who we are, and however that is perfect.
And I think it's beautiful. Yeah.
It is beautiful.
They're singing and dancing and jumping around. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. Like,
go
for it.
So I love that you use that example. I think that's, like, really something that people need to hear on both ends. It's always both ends.
Right.
Okay, so let's get into some juicy stories, because I know you've got some stories. I want to hear more about, like, you know, your mediumship and your clairvoyancy. What are some times that you have communicated to spirit, either for yourself or for others?
Wow.
Do you have any
I
stories that are just kind of, let's just have story time?
there's one story will always stay in my mind. I'm a stylist
Mhm.
and I owned a salon, and it was just me and my client, and her grandmother was coming through. And I've never had a spirit come in so strong to where she almost knocked the wind out of me.
Mm.
And I'm like, oh man, I got to keep it professional. I can't. Yeah, I don't know how she feels about the supernatural or
Right,
paranormal.
right.
And how am I going to go about telling her this? And it's just me and her. She's my last client. My assistant left. So I'm like, listen, can I ask you a question? How open are you to the paranormal? And she's like, oh, I love it. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm like, if I tell you something, I don't want it to freak you out. And she's like, oh, sure. I'm like, listen, your grandmother here. And the lady told me her name. She showed herself to me. Her name was Conchetta. Like, so spirits show themselves to you by who they want themselves to look like.
Mm-hmm.
So this lady had like big bouffant yellow hair and just blue makeup, red lips, and long fingernails, a lot of jewelry. She's showing me she's playing cards with other people. And I described it. The client jumped out of the chair and she started crying. She's like, what did you say? And I'm like, like, this is not what I want to happen, you know? So she was coming through telling me that there was a medallion that belonged to her, my client, that was supposed to go to her. And when she passed, it was put away in a closet and it was forgotten. And she was really upset because she wanted her granddaughter to have this gold medallion. And the lady, the ghost, let's call her the ghost, Conchetta, told me it was in a closet. She showed me the closet. It was in a wooden box up on a top shelf. And it was like these old closets with, I still see the closet, sliding doors that sort of, they're brown sliding doors.
Mm-hmm.
And it's on the top left corner. And she called her mom, and it was exactly where it was. She brought it in to show me. And it was exactly what I saw. And she was just completely blown away.
Yeah.
I also had a friend lose a diamond, a ring,
Mm-hmm.
who belonged to her father.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at her, I'm like, did you lose a diamond? Because I saw it in a track also on the track of the closet. And she went to check, and the diamond was there.
Wow, that's a good one.
So it's sort of weird little things. I'm also trying to still learn how to hone in and sort of control. I don't want to say control, but have more, I guess, control to.
Like a say when you can use it type thing.
Yeah, when I can use them, when I cannot.
Yeah. Because that was going to be a question I had, was like, are you to the point where you can just tap in and like ask a question and get it? Or does it just kind of come and go?
Yeah, it comes into, I can touch, and this is crazy. There are times I can touch an item and know someone was there.
Okay, here we go, guys. Clairsentient. That's another one on the list. That's when you can feel things. So let's get into that.
So I truly believe we all give off a specific frequency, or I call it, this is the only way I can describe it, my way of describing it. It's a frequency. And I think we all, I guess, vibrate or resonate in a different frequency. And sometimes it's left behind. And I can feel who was, let's say someone sat in that chair.
Yeah.
I could sit in that chair and feel it. And I'm like, hey, babe, was so-and-so here? It's like, yeah, how did you know? I'm like, they sat right here, didn't they? It's like, yeah, it completely blows them away.
Yeah.
It's more of a feeling. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And that's like a very specific form of clairsentient. Another description of clairsentient that I've learned, which I think all of us do, is just being empathic and being an empath. And so, like I've heard it described, if you watch America's Funniest Home Videos and someone gets hit in the stomach and you all go, and you feel it yourself, that's all being an empath is. And I think we've put this idea that like being empathic means that you're psychic and you're different, but it's really not. It just means that you can feel something, and that would be maybe a more subtle example. And then I think, your version of being able to sit in a chair and feel that energy is a more heightened example of what being an empath is. I'm very empathic to the sense of like what we were talking about earlier, where I can walk into a room and I can feel certain energy, like of specific, I guess, spirits. But it's no difference also than like meeting somebody. If you meet somebody and right off the bat, you're like, oh no, no, I'm not feeling this. You know,
But when I first met you, I'm like, when we first met,
yeah,
I'm like, oh yeah, this is my soul sister.
yeah, I like her.
Yeah.
I like her. So funny. No, that's really true. Okay, so we've talked about clairvoyance, where you can see, and you know, that could be like images in your mind, or you can see the external energy. We've got clairsentient was feeling. Did we talk about claircognizant? That's when you just know things, right? Can you talk about when you went to go see the therapist and then, because you've told me this one, and then she kind of diagnosed you with tell me that little story.
So it's a science-based practice.
Right.
So he's trying to find answers to, I guess, why I see things or why I feel things. And he told me that I could read body language, or he called me a social genius because I can read slight differences in people or whatnot. And I'm like, okay, so what? I left with more questions than answers.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, okay, all right, fine. I'm not crazy, but why do I see that? Why
do I see dead people?
I felt like I was left with more questions than anything.
Was that the same session where he or she was showing you cards and you were just telling me, what's that one? Is that the same therapist?
That was, they kept showing me cards. Which one am I holding? What am I holding up? This is someone else, a different, and I kept coming up with what they were holding. Again, they said it was a social thing. I learned how to read faces, and I'm like, okay, so maybe I'm good at poker, but
right. So they were holding up cards, is what it was, and you were guessing like the color and the number and the suit on every card.
Yeah, they showed me like 5 cards, and like, okay, this is a heart, that's circle, that's diamond, that blah blah blah, heart, and I'm just say, okay, it's a heart, it's a circle, it's
funny,
and
it
was interesting.
That's funny that you left with more questions. I mean, because it is a very science-based practice, and a lot of this work is very subjective, but again, that's kind of who we are. We are energy, and we are all subjective, and that kind of gets back to putting the labels and boxes on things. So okay, so another of one of the clairs that I learned was clairaudience, which is smelling, and then clairgustance, which is tasting. Have you ever experienced any, I guess, heightened tasting or smelling?
I think we all have that. Smells to me are very, I'm totally into the whole aromatherapy, the whole, I haven't gotten any, I guess, vibe or any smells, but smells always bring me back to specific points in life where,
interesting. Yeah.
Like you smell woods and grass. It reminds you of like summer camp. Or a specific time in your life. There is this one time I don't think it's a sweetness in the air when the spring comes.
Yeah.
And I know spring is coming because I could smell a specific sweetness, or fall's coming, it's.
Yeah. No, I get that. And I love, it's actually a very different way of thinking than I was thinking. And the examples that you gave are so, it like just normalizes everything that we've been talking about, which I think it is, right? Like us beings, we are spirits, right? We're not, this is, my truth is that we are spirits. We're not humans. We're coming here to have the human experience, but our most natural form is a spirit. And so it's funny that you talked about the smells bringing you back to a specific memory, because this is kind of crazy. I don't know if I'll do the conversation justice, but it's like going to different timelines and kind of thinking about the whole idea of like, are we all on just these different timelines and they're all happening at the same time? And there's a whole rabbit hole there, but it's funny because, when I first brought it up, I was thinking, sometimes, so like an example of clairaudience would be if your grandfather used to smoke the tobacco and then you smell tobacco smoke around you and his spirit is here. Like that's an example, I guess, of the label definition of
Oh yeah,
aliens.
perfumes
Right. Exactly.
and absolutely. I mean, they say smell of sulfur. You
Uh-huh.
smell sulfur, it's negative energy.
Ah,
You
okay.
smell of rock, or
Yeah. I've never actually had that external smelling. I think my smelling and my taste are like low on the list because I've never really experienced any of that before in the way that I just talked about. But the whole memory thing, that's interesting because oh my gosh, yeah, I get that all the time. I
yeah.
wish as we all do, I think that's a part of us. But have you ever smelled a scent of a spirit, like what we were just speaking of?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What's an example of that?
The example is an old library.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's a stale.
Yeah.
It's a stale sweetness.
Okay. I get it.
You
When as
know,
soon as
like
you said it, I smelled the old library.
yeah. If
So,
I could say it's like woody, but sweeter than woody,
mhm.
that's the smell.
Were you able to connect it to an actual, or just kind of the environment
Yeah,
as well?
just the environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something here. I could
Mhm.
smell. Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
Actually, now that I think about it, there was one time where I tasted something. Again, it's never happened in my life. I guess that's not one of my best senses, but there was a time, and it was as I was going to bed, and the lights were off, and I was kind of getting ready, and I tasted licorice, like old school licorice. And I know from doing the ghost tours, like that was one of the original candies, and like children, and this and that, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's a kid spirit here, right? Because of
Yeah,
that connection. And
yeah.
then what's even funny? I'll go ahead and share a little ghost story with you guys. Well, no, it's not a ghost story, but something that we've talked about before. So when I did the ghost tours, there were a lot of children spirits naturally around, but there were a couple that were, I guess, existent in the building that we took off from. And it was funny because I asked you, I said, Gabe, I've been having all of these dreams lately of being in this old house downtown, which is where I work. But, in my dream, it looked different, but it was still the same space. Like I was able to connect with it. And I said, every time I go into this house, I know that there's like a ghost or a spirit in here. And it was always dark and like chalky and ashy and like this whole vibe. Right. And so I asked you, and do you remember what you said?
Yes,
Go
little
ahead and say
girl.
it. Yeah.
It's the little girl. She follows you around.
Mm-hmm.
And not that she's attached to you, but when you're there, she likes to be with you
Yeah.
almost like you're a big sister or an older sister, and you
Yeah.
bring comfort to her.
And I asked you about like all the ash and stuff. And do you remember what you said to that?
Oh, her dress caught on fire. It
Yes.
was
Right.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
you said that you had seen her little black shoes. Well, I mean, maybe like Victorian era, 18th. I don't.
Yeah, I remember. I remember that. It is a
Right.
little weird. That's a terrible way of going, little girl getting caught on fire. But for some reason, I don't know why, you could sort of feel the wave I mean, it sounds it's intense.
It does. Right. We're not to get on to how she
Yeah,
died because that is a sad story,
you could
but
feel the wave of how she went.
Mhm.
The
Right.
the the
So
force. Yeah.
to bring it back to not to death, which I do actually, we'll talk about death in just a second. But that night that I was in my room and I tasted the licorice, that was the first thing that my mind went to, was that story of when you said that. So again, since that was my first thought, that's what you go with, and that's what I kind of equated it to. And I was like, oh yeah, like I guess she's here right now. And then getting into the boundaries, I've made a boundary when I sleep. I'm like, okay, there is, I'm not allowed to see anything when I sleep. And, I do the whole prayer of like, only the light and ancestors are allowed to, be here. And it's funny because around the time that I was making those prayers of boundaries, especially at nighttime, I actually had a dream one time where, long story short, I was, going up these stairs, and I went into this big mattress room. It was a room full of beds. And at that time I had been working a lot. So I think one of the messages was like, hey, you need to like slow down and get some rest. But also what was cute was I went to my bed, which was right in the middle, and there was a gate around my bed. And my dog was with me. And one of the the symbols that I use as my dog is like protection. And so there was a gate around my bed, and then the dog was protection. So it was like double protection as I sleep. And that was kind of what I got from that dream. Like, okay, I'm protected when I sleep. You don't have to keep worrying about this. So that was kind of a cool thing that I had done. But, yeah. So, and then real quick, let's talk about death. We've kind of mentioned it before, but we were kind of starting to get into like how this spirit had died, and it is a very sad thing. But if you have, I think, the perspective that you and me have, dying doesn't really mean that you're gone, right? Can you just speak on that? Whatever comes to mind.
I mean, it's morbid. I mean, it's just part of life.
Yeah.
It's part of our story. I don't, it's sad for us in this consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess because I'll miss you, because personally, I'm not going to see you,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not a sad thing. I feel like it's a release to your next story.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a coming and going. And
Yeah.
what, Gabe, I was thinking about this. You and me are going to have another episode together. And I would really love to just talk about, I guess, our perspectives on what happens when we die and kind of why do we come here. We can't get into it right now because it'll be a whole nother hour or two, which, I'm sure you guys might like to hear or not. But I was thinking about that and I was like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about this because I think it needs to be talked about. Of course, everybody's truth is their own truth, but I've got a lot to say on that. So, okay, Gabe. Well, this has been amazing. I've got one more question for you.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Do you have any last pieces of advice for us, or anything that you want to share, anything that comes through, one lasting thought for us?
I feel like people are listening. Try to step out of yourself. Try not to give yourself, within limits, try not to give yourself boundaries and let yourself be. I feel like a lot, what's going on in the world, we all have a lot of conflict. I think it's okay to just be.
Yeah.
We tend to beat ourselves up or set, I guess, goals. And if we don't meet those goals, we beat ourselves up for it. And I think, again, we have to find that child inside of us and just let them be. Mm-hmm.
I love that. I think that's so beautiful. And I love, the terminology of step outside of yourself. I literally think of my spirit stepping outside of my body. And we've talked about that before, on previous episodes, stepping out of your story, like everything that we get stuck in, like, let's just step out because we're so much more than our story.
And that's exactly what it is. It's a story, right? Right. And we get caught up in that. Let the spirit be once in a while,
Yeah.
I
love it.
That'll be it. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Gabe, thank you so much for joining us today. I had a great time with you.
It was awesome. My pleasure.
Yeah. And we're going to have you back on and we're going to talk about this whole idea of what happens when we come here, what happens when we die, because that's obviously right up our alley. So guys, if you enjoyed this episode, please use it to inspire those around you. And I will see you next time on In a Spiritual Sense. For those looking to connect further, please feel free to send emails to info@inaspiritualsense.com or hit me up on Instagram at spiagno. That is SPIAGNO, where you can find weekly inspiration and updates. I look forward to connecting with you.